Okay, welcome back. So this is the second component of your cover letter. We've talked about why the firm. If you want to see that video, just look at the playlist. You'll be able to access that. But this is, okay, once you've written about why that specific firm, you've also got to justify why that division. And this again can be a difficult component, but it's that one-hit wonder. Once you do one, once you've got it right the first time, you'll be able to use this across different firms. And perhaps you'll tailor it a little bit for smaller firms, for kind of firms focus on a specific division, such as for me with Torch Partners, they're focused in tech advisory, so I'd kind of really hone in on that aspect of my interests in terms of why the division. But generally, this is a narrative, this is a story, this is a couple of reasons that you're going to carry through in each of your applications. Okay, so I have two approaches here. And again, this is, although this is, I'm sharing the strategy that works for me, this is something that will evolve. This is something that, in the first month you'll use one approach, in the second month you'll think of something else. And when you do interviews, you will kind of evolve it again and again and again. And, be patient with yourself. Harness that feedback loop. But the two approaches I used was one which was, I suppose, more of a, here are my two reasons, and here's my justification for those two reasons. And the second one, which was more of a personal one, and this works better, I felt, because it unleashes that human element, it unleashes that more personal aspect, that that aspect where you're like, okay, I'm actually passionate about what I'm saying, and when you're, okay, there is the risk of talking too fast, as I tend to do, when that happens, but it also gives you that confidence boost, it really reduces and lowers your nerves in that interview environment. So that's why I'll be focusing on the narrative component as well. But let's begin with the first one, which was just have two simple reasons and justify that. Also, if you haven't seen the first introductory video on cover letters, I talk about this kind of idea of using the pyramid principle and communicating in a clear way. And look, I'm not the master of this. In fact, this is a book I actually recommend reading like every 6 months, and just like, making your communication sharp again and again and again, just like sharpening the saw. And the way, it really helps you is it helps you communicate so that other people, when they read your work, they're going to understand it immediately. Now, how does that happen? Well, you have a top line kind of reason, and then within that, the sentences after that are just justifying that reason. So it's not deductively saying, oh, I had this experience and I had that experience and that experience and that experience, and eventually I found out I was interested in investment banking. It's, this is the reason why I'm interested in investment banking, and here's proof to show that I'm not just talking a load of rubbish, that I'm actually justified and genuine in what I'm saying. So here's the example that I use first. And I use this for, I think, about half of my cover letters, and then I pivoted as I did a few interviews and decided to go with a narrative approach. And something I also think is really useful is having an interview group, right? Having someone, maybe it's one person, maybe it's a couple of people you're doing mock interviews with, because this is actually what the narrative technique was born out of when I first did it. It was someone suggesting, a very close friend suggesting to me to go a bit deeper, a bit more on that personal side, and so I really recommend doing that as well. But let's begin. Without further ado, what is approach one? What is this two simple reasons approach? So I've got it here. I'll kind of talk you through it very simply. For me, it was the fact that financial advisory, which is kind of like a really key aspect of investment banking, the investment banking division, advising companies in a merger or an acquisition or an IPO, or generating like funding growth capital. It was the fact that it's based on an analytical mindset. You need to have an analytical mindset to thrive in the industry, and also that M&A can have a meaningful impact. Now, I'm not saying a meaningful impact on the world, I'm saying a meaningful impact on that company's growth story. Be specific here, and don't lie, just be genuine. And I'll show you why I don't think I was being ingenuine in those responses. So the first part is the analytical mindset. So I then go on the second sentence and prove, like, maybe not so, I probably don't need to explain why you need an analytical mindset. HR always talking about how you need an analytical mindset for the industry, but I'll probably talk about why I enjoy that place where I'm harnessing that analytical mindset. So for me, it was a spring week. It could be a group project. It could be a side extracurricular you do. And I talk about how, during my latter spring week, the part I most enjoyed was analyzing 5 potential buyers concerning a mock company sale. And that just shows, okay, the part I most enjoyed was an analytical component. And that just tells the interviewer, you know what, he does enjoy analytical tasks. And that's like proving the first part of that statement. The second thing is really kind of, why do I think that this is meaningful for the company's growth story? And for me, the path, and again, this is unique to you. This will be unique based on your experiences. For me, I'd done a remote part-time internship at a company where I was analysing specific public companies that had grown through acquisition, that had a massive runway of growth and were growing through acquisition. And I could see that the most, kind of rigorously growing and the most, the greatest opportunities as an investment were those companies that were employing their, their equity, their retained earnings through that acquisition model. And I could just see, right, acquisitions actually do provide a lot of value to that company that is acquiring. And so that's the two components, the two ways I justify it. That's component one. Very simple, 2 reasons. Here's me proving those 2 reasons, and kind of using that pyramid principle approach. Let's move on to approach 2. This, I think, I personally advise this, but again, I'm just sharing my technique. You use what works with you. This is just what really worked with me. And in one line, this is all about creating a narrative. So think about, who have you been exposed to that inspired you to go into a very kind of commercial role, a very corporate kind of job where you're advising companies on the critical parts of their growth journey, for example. Maybe one of your parents ran a charity shop. Maybe you've been exposed to a small enterprise, an entrepreneurial person, and you've seen the struggles they've faced in kind of acquiring capital. And again, you're drawing from your own experiences. It's not about having a big, impressive experience. It's about having something that's personal to you. For me personally, I would draw on the fact that I'd always, when I was younger, I'd hear stories of my granddad who had a restaurant at Upton Park outside the West Ham Stadium, and it was a steakhouse, and how that was a business, and how that really drew me to becoming very curious about how companies grow, about how they can employ that runway of growth. And again, so that's a very personal story. As I mentioned at the beginning, when you bring in something that's more personal to you, you find, I don't know the science behind this, but you really engage a much more genuine aspect of what you're talking about, and you become more naturally more interested. You become more kind of relaxed, and you begin to talk a bit slower, and that's going to really help you stand out in that interview. But also, look, you bring in that narrative component. That's kind of what got me interested in a certain aspect of the division. So for me, it was really being interested in helping a company at that critical stage of growth in their history. Probably what would be that sometimes the most important kind of growth area for that CEO or CFO that they're going to cover in terms of being a merger or an acquisition or launching on the stock market as an IPO, and it's quite an exciting area to help advise. It's a critical part of that growth story, and that I back up that with a narrative. But I'd also kind of loop in some of those original reasons. I'd loop in how this is actually quite meaningful. I'd loop in the fact that when they overcome those challenges, you're using those expertise to serve them in that unique way. So as I said, why division? Again, this is tough. This is a high fixed cost. This is going to take you time. This is going to take you time to evolve. You're going to do it with other people. You're going to give them, you're going to hear other people's responses, and they're going to hear yours, and you're going to help improve each other's in that way. And it's going to take a very kind of patient process of going through that feedback loop. But I assure you that even mentally, when you have it clearly laid out of why you're doing this, and this is not about creating a fake response, this is about being genuine, this is about being specific, this is about being very, having something that's going to be meaningful for you. This is going to be a hard process. Even aside from the fact you need this for the cover letter and all the interviews, it's nice to know why you're doing it. And I really recommend you kind of invest that time into discovering this. You know what one of the other things is, maybe you are struggling to really pin down the concise reasons as to why you're going into this. Even as I'll talk about later with networking can really help you with that, because you'll begin to hear other people's experiences. You'll begin to hear what led them to the division itself, and that could really inspire you to realize what was that moment that led you down this path. So that's the second component of the cover letter. Hopefully that's 2/3 of the way through, and that leads us to the final component, which is why you. So stay tuned for that video.